Okay, thank you, everyone. Now I will give you Sharon Squazzoni from CSIS. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Squazzoni, and I direct the Proliferation Prevention Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's my pleasure to moderate this session on evaluating the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference from 2010. As those of you might know, the 2010 Review Conference was widely perceived to be a success. We got a consensus document, but in part, that may be because the 2005 Review Conference was such an abysmal failure. We have a panelist of 4 experts for you today. Leading off the debate will be Dr. Hossam Eldin Ali from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Egypt. He has been the Disarmament and International Security Counselor of the Permanent Mission of Egypt to the UN since 2007, and he holds a PhD in political science from the University of Virginia. Following Dr. Ali, we'll have Scott Davis from the U.S. State Department. And your bio here gives you all kinds of interesting things, including a military background, which I know is not the case. Scott is an old friend and colleague. He has worked in the State Department and the Department of Energy. He's an expert in all manner of nuclear issues. Following Scott, we have Ambassador Nobuyasu Abe from the Japan Institute of International Affairs. He directs the Center for the Promotion of Disarmament and Nonproliferation, and he is the former Undersecretary General of the UN for Disarmament Affairs. And last but not least, we have Peter Krell from the U.S. Arms Control Association. He has been at the ACA since 2007. And before that, he was with the Center for Nonproliferation Studies, and he was a consultant for the UN Department for Disarmament Affairs. So, Dr. Ali, I'd like to invite you to give some brief comments to start us off with.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I think I will just try to structure my very brief comments in answering 4 questions. What are the most important achievements of the 2010 Review Conference? What are the disappointments that might be there? What are the most important lessons, and what most important tasks do we have to follow up on? It is, of course, obvious that the 2010 Review Conference was an event of severe importance, and it was preceded by many months of intense preparatory work, be it on an official level in terms of consultations by the president of the conference and among key players in the framework of the treaty, and I think that paid off. Of course, there was until the last minute, until the adoption of the final document on the 28th of May, many of us had doubts that this would still be possible, because this came against a background of diverse aspirations by a number of important groupings. And NAM came into the meeting with very high expectations. Egypt had the honor of representing NAM as NAM chair during the NPT review conference. We know that NAM had very high aspirations relating to nuclear disarmament, to negative security assurances, and to a nuclear weapons convention within a given time frame by 2025. Of course, the P5 had a different set of agendas. NATO countries had a different range of priorities. The New Agenda Coalition had very high expectations as well. The measure how successful the conference was, I think everybody at the end of the day accepted that if the conference could succeed in adopting a final document, that in itself would be far better than failing to do so, as was the case in 2005. The NPT credibility would have been in serious jeopardy if we repeatedly fail to review it every 5 years, particularly at this very important juncture where many other related processes are in meeting serious challenges. Regarding the most important achievements, I think on nuclear disarmament, for example, along with non-proliferation and peaceful use of nuclear energy, 3 plans of action future-looking plans of action were adopted there. Many of them, many of the elements included, particularly in the nuclear disarmament aspect, have been new to the framework. For example, the identification of the objective of a nuclear weapon-free world as the main purpose for nuclear disarmament, I think it's a very important development there. The reaffirmation of the 13 practical steps and the unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to nuclear disarmament has been also a very important achievement there, because some were questioning whether all the 13 practical steps would be relevant. Can we actually maintain them, or should we move to more of a different approach and amend them? I think it was very important to keep them as such. I think there was also very important development there where there is, for the first time, a reference to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and that all states members of the NPT had to abide totally to the international humanitarian law in this regard, which is in a way an indirect way to ban the use of nuclear weapons, which I think, although it's very much of a weak half measure, is a step forward and an important element. Most importantly as well, the outcome, the plan of action on nuclear disarmament noted the UN Secretary General's 5-point plan on nuclear disarmament, and I think this is a very important thing, and that reference was not only general in nature but also specific, where for the first time in a review conference outcome, we had a clear and direct reference to a nuclear weapons convention. So I think these are all very, very useful elements that were included. There was a serious call on the nuclear weapon states to report on their on their nuclear disarmament undertakings to the 2014 preparatory committee. I think this is also something that is very concrete. It's very measurable. I understand, and my colleague Scott Davis can maybe confirm the efforts done in this context between the P5 and the upcoming Paris meeting, which we anticipate with enthusiasm and are very curious to see what outcome it will produce. Regarding non-proliferation, I think there was agreement on strengthening the IAEA safeguards, strengthening the IAEA itself in fulfilling its purpose and goal, call for further conclusions of comprehensive safeguards agreements, and encouragement call for further additional protocol accessions, export controls, physical protection elements. The non-proliferation dimension perhaps did not particularly refer to any cases of non-compliance, as many of the countries participating in the conference wanted, but it framed the issue very well. And so is the case for peaceful usage of nuclear energy. While the conference was preceded by very heated debate on the multilateral approaches to nuclear fuel cycle and other related issues, the outcome, the plan of action on peaceful use of nuclear energy, clearly reaffirmed the right of non-nuclear weapon states to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, reaffirmed that the importance of respecting national choices and decisions in that regard, and the importance of enhancing the effectiveness of the IAEA Technical Cooperation Program. These are all very important. In addition to the 3 plans of action comes a 4th plan of action, which I think was very crucial for paving the way for the adoption of an outcome document, which is the set of measures agreed on the implementation of the 1995 Review Conference. These mainly included a reaffirmation of the P5 commitment to implement the resolution, a UN Secretary General mandate in order to convene in cooperation with the 3 depositories of the treaty and in consultation with countries of the Middle East, a conference in 2012 on the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region, and as well as other weapons of mass destruction. Touching quickly on the biggest disappointments, of course, remains the fact that the conference, while adopting a future-looking 3 plans of actions and a set of measures on the Middle East, failed on the review part. The review segment of the conference outcome has just been taken note of by the conference and has been considered as a chairman's paper. This, of course, is something that comes with certain consequences for the future review process, since it reflects our inability to agree collectively on reviewing the implementation of the treaty. Very little progress actually has been, sorry for that, very little progress has been acknowledged on actual implementation. The implementation dimension remained an issue. We again renewed our commitments, we again pushed forward, but till now, 1 year after the adoption of this outcome, very little has been done to materialize the commitments that have been adopted there. I think NAM walked out of the meeting with a disappointment that there was no time-bound nuclear disarmament acknowledged. The set goal of 2025 for a nuclear weapons convention to be in place has not been reached. Even a nuclear weapons convention has not been adopted as the route forward. The language on nuclear disarmament could have been firmer in a number of paragraphs in the outcome. NAM wanted to see a stronger language, be it on negative security assurances. And finally, much of the important elements of the 13 practical steps have been somehow delegated to the CD, to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, while the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva has a very special situation, and there's no move there, there's no negotiations there, and there is a very serious obstacle in order to arrive at a program of work enabling the Conference on Disarmament to actually fulfill its mandate under that NPT outcome. So this is another hurdle that we will have to deal with. The most important lessons I would just quickly touch on is perhaps the value of concrete and thorough preparatory processes. I think this was central to the success of the conference. The importance of leadership. I think a number of key players, including the US and others, played on all levels a very important leadership role that could allow us to end up with this very successful outcome. I think the value of a successful approach, of a flexible approach that does not really call for all or nothing at all, has been enabling us to arrive at that outcome. Everybody accepted a blend of what they wanted to see in a document and what they could perhaps not live with a document without, and accepted this overall package in order to make sure the conference does not miss a chance for success. On the most important items to follow up on, I think the 3 action plans are quite rich in the elements they include. I think the tasks are very clear. Those that relate to the nuclear weapon states, those that relate to the non-nuclear weapon states are quite obvious. The biggest challenges on the way forward will remain very visible, I think, at this stage. One of which is that success of 2015 would be completely dependent on on our success in implementing what we agreed in 2010. The problem now is this flexible approach that we managed to follow to ensure the success of 2010, namely to skip the review part and enable the chair to just adopt it as a chairman's paper and move to the future-looking dimension without actually assessing that implementation, is not something we can do in another 5 years. So I think in 5 years, we really have to succeed on the review, and this will require an implementation record that enables that. I think it's evident more than ever, as is always the case within the NPT, regional issues and their link to universality remain very prominent. Of course, I mentioned the measures on the Middle East. The measures on the Korean Peninsula were more delegated to the region. There is a very clear reference there, identification of the importance of DPRK implementing their commitments under the 2005 joint statement, a call upon DPRK to rejoin the NPT regime, to again submit its facilities to comprehensive safeguards agreements with the agency, but most importantly to underline the importance of the 6-party talks framework as the way forward in this regard. So it's somehow delegated this to the region, but still we need to see success there. Finally, on a closing note, the 2010 review conference outcome has not been perfect, but it's better than nothing, and it provides a very solid basis that could be built in to bring about the vision of a nuclear weapon-free world if we have the patience and the stamina and the perseverance to move collectively down that road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hussam. Other panelists, you have to know that he answered all of my questions, and he did it in 11 minutes. So there's been a very high bar. Thank you. I have a quick question for you, and that is, with all the turmoil in the Middle East, can we really expect progress on a conference on a substantive conference on a WMD-free zone in the Middle East?
Right. I think we actually can. I think the situation today is better than it was before. I think with the Arab Spring and democracy sweeping into the Arab world, I think it's bringing much more promise and prospects to stability in the region. Whatever is going to be agreed within a regional framework is going to be something that is supported by the people and thus something that's more sustainable and so on. On a substantive conference, I think what is asked at this stage is more a process that will be launched in the framework of a conference. Whatever the agenda of that conference is will be the decision of regional states. The facilitator will consult with them on every detail relating to that, and they have to collectively see what kind of approaches that they can, what kind of process they need to create through that conference to address their security concerns collectively, not only particular groups within the region, but every single country, Arab states as well as Israel, as well as Iran. And I think everybody has a very positive stake in this, because what they can reap out of that is their security and the security of their people. And this is a very, very high value thing that I think should be pushed and pursued collectively.
We might have a problem with Libya.
Yeah.
From just a practical perspective. Scott.
Thank you.
Please take the floor.
Sharon mentioned earlier a little confusion about my identity. There was some mistake regarding who I actually was in the initial materials. I can assure you that I don't have a Air Force colonel's uniform back home in my closet, and my colleagues from the National War College in Washington, from the military, would be amused to find out that I was identified here as an Air Force colonel. I'm actually a State Department employee. I too will follow Sharon's useful outline, the questions that she put forth and Hossam addressed. I share a lot of the comments Hossam made, and he covered the general outline of the outcome of the RevCon quite well. Let me highlight some particular areas of importance to the U.S. First, I would say there's a lot of talk about what is success, and some dissatisfaction with the notion that simply getting agreement on a document is a sign of success or equal to success. Isn't this just words after all? Fair point, but I think it's worth, in thinking about that, it's worth considering what would have happened if there hadn't been agreement on a document, what that would have meant for the non-proliferation regime, the NPT itself. And also take note of the fact that none of the participants, there were 170 participants in the review conference, none of them blocked the final consensus on the document. What does that mean? For example, what might that mean for the impact of international opinion on Iran's behavior? Because Iran, of course, was at the review conference. So going through the three pillars of the treaty and the specific achievements of the RevCon, many of them will be similar to those that Hossam mentioned. Obviously, the reflection in the final document of President Obama's, not that he's the sole possessor of the vision of a nuclear weapons-free world, but the reflection of that in the final document, of course, is an important achievement. Specifically calls for negotiation of a fissile material cutoff treaty, entry into force of the CTBT. For the first time, the P5 were called explicitly by NPT parties to engage on a number of disarmament-related matters. In fact, we have done that. We will now do it again at the end of this month in Paris, and a number of issues will be discussed. The focus will be on verification, confidence building, and transparency. Something that's not mentioned quite as much is that states were encouraged to ratify nuclear weapons-free zones. I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the area of non-proliferation, again, Hossam mentioned many of those. Promotion of universal adherence to the treaty, very important. Also very important, while the names of the countries of, say, Iran and Syria were not mentioned, the final document does call for resolving cases of noncompliance. We were quite surprised and pleased that there was a call for all states to join the additional protocol. We know that there's resistance to that on the part of a number of states, and yet the final document did call on all states to do that. In addition, it calls for providing for states to provide the necessary resources to the IAEA, and in fact, we were able to secure just last week a recommendation by the IAEA Board of Governors for a 3.2% increase in the IAEA's budget. So we're making progress there. In the area of peaceful uses, we were particularly pleased. We thought it was an achievement that the what we call now the Peaceful Uses Initiative, announced by Secretary Clinton at the review conference, was in effect endorsed by the final document. States were called on to support it. And furthermore, that the concept of pursuing multilateral fuel assurances was also endorsed by the final document. And we've seen progress in that area in Vienna at the IAEA. Clearly, the outcome on the Middle East was a success. Much work to be done, as Hossam pointed out, but we think it's important that this was agreed, and we're working hard on trying to bring into effect what the review conference endorsed. Disappointments. It was disappointing to the United States, and if you read the statements made by high-level officials after the conference, that while the fact that Israel is not a party to the NPT was explicitly mentioned, there was no reference to the fact that Syria and Iran are not in compliance with the treaty. That was disappointing to the United States. Another area of disappointment, I'll call it a qualified disappointment, because we have, along with a number of other parties, significant concerns about potential abuse of the NPT's withdrawal provision. And that issue was debated thoroughly, but it did not reach consensus. So again, we think more work needs to be done in that area. Lessons. Hossam mentioned some very important ones. I'll just add a couple that are somewhat process-oriented, but I think important. It seemed that in 2010, after 10 years of lack of consensus among NPT parties on substantive matters, that the parties were determined to find a way to emphasize their common interests, the commonality they had on the NPT. And that created an environment in which we thought, which I think helped significantly in reaching agreement on the final document. They saw the RevCon as an opportunity to strengthen the treaty and not to emphasize their differences. And I think this is similar to what Hossam said, the serious and long-term engagement among the parties. This is something the United States put a lot of emphasis on, and we think it paid off, particularly with regard to trying to bridge the divide across regional and political, or geographical and political groupings. Moving on to items to follow up. I think it's important to also note that the review conference, while an important event, is really no more than a milestone on a road. And we kind of, I think a road is a good metaphor because there's a lot of work to be done. We're on this road, arguably, or at least the vision is to reach a nuclear weapons-free world. But the RevCon isn't an end in itself, and I think that's something we have to keep in mind, particularly with regard to the fact that we did get a final document with 64 actions plus the plan for the Middle East, and we're moving forward on a number of those. And let me just mention some of which have already been accomplished, some of which are in progress. Clearly, the New START treaty is in force and being implemented. We're seeking vigorously negotiations on FMCT. We've been frustrated on that, but we're hopeful that we can get negotiations or at least meaningful discussions started in the relatively near future. As Secretary Clinton indicated in her statement to the review conference, we have submitted to our Senate for its advice and consent the protocols to the African and South Pacific nuclear weapons-free zones. We're also consulting with the parties to the Central and Southeast Asia nuclear weapons-free zones to try to reach agreement with those parties and also on the part of the other P5 states so that we can all join the protocols to those. I mentioned already we would be having the next in a series of engagement among the P5 that'll take place in Paris at the end of the month. You'll see hopefully a fairly meaningful outcome document from that meeting. We continue to work very vigorously. This goes without saying, I think, if you observe U.S. behavior on nonproliferation, to return those states out of compliance with the NPT and or their safeguards agreements to compliance. And you will have seen, of course, just last week, the IAEA Board of Governors approved a resolution finding Syria non-compliance and referring that case to the UN Security Council. Another very important area that we have continued and will continue vigorously to pursue is universal adherence to the additional protocol. I mentioned the increase in the IAEA budget. It's not merely a matter of money. We're working extensively with the agency on a wide range of areas. I mentioned the Peaceful Use Initiative, obviously also on safeguards. The IAEA board did approve a fuel bank for the IAEA just last year, the end of last year. So that's another step of progress. Hope to continue to work that issue and implement the fuel bank. The United States has allocated $10 million to the Peaceful Uses Initiative, $10 million, and we are finding other co-sponsors of the initiative and those who will help fund it. We'll continue to pursue the issue of withdrawal that I mentioned, and obviously we'll continue very vigorously and at high levels to pursue the convening of the conference in the Middle East, hopefully in 2012. Opportunities and challenges. I think I would just say two things. One is I think going forward, one of the most difficult things we're going to have, and this is maybe a normal situation, but I think it'll be more obvious now with the action plan, and that is how do we evaluate progress? There will be those who say progress has been insufficient, those who say, look what we've done. So is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? How do we evaluate progress? How do we find agreement or at least narrow the differences on what progress has taken place? And in terms of the specific areas, I think the general topics that will remain challenges will not change. So I think the three that I would cite are disarmament, compliance, and the Middle East. And those going forward, I think, will be the biggest challenges for the NPT. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Wow, you did that in 10 minutes, 1 minute less.
Keep up with our Egyptian colleagues.
I have seen, yeah, that's right. What I heard, I mean, we're having a very civil discussion here, but whereas Hossam, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said there was no reference to noncompliance, and that was a good thing. Yes?
No? I actually meant that a number of countries pursued during consultations and drafting of text and preceding consultations on the nature of the outcome, they wanted to mention particular files that they saw as cases of non-compliance. They wanted a process of finger pointing at a particular number of cases, and they wanted to see names there. However, it didn't end up that way. We ended up, as Scott very rightly mentioned, that non-compliance cases had to be addressed in the proper way that is already acknowledged under the NPT framework, but no particular country or a particular nuclear file was mentioned in this context.
Okay, but that is one area of disagreement that Scott thinks Syria and Iran should have been mentioned. Okay. I will give the floor over to Ambassador Abe for an NGO perspective, but also decades of experience dealing with these issues.
Thank you. I'll be brief. As far as the achievement of the review conference 2010 is concerned, I think the greatest accomplishment was that the fact that they succeeded in adopting final document with a comprehensive action plan, which contained many actions to be implemented. Disappointment, I think, was, from my point of view, rather thin, weak outcome on the side of non-proliferation. Certainly, additional protocol was mentioned, but I remember it was rather weak encouragement that was in the document. So it was not a very strong pressure to force anybody to sign and adopt it. Then, as to the disarmament side, too, there are many items mentioned related to disarmament, but as you read carefully the final document, they are all cushioned in a very careful expressions, and which may be read as not showing very strong obligation on those nuclear weapon states. So in that sense, it is a rather weak document. So I would call overall, it was not a huge success, but rather a modest success. That's my assessment. I agree that in producing that successful outcome, I agree with Asan that the leadership of the conference was very important, and I think in that sense, the president of the conference and the team did a great job. after all, having said that this was a modest success, I think you have to appreciate that after all, this review process is based on a very strict consensus rule. And there's no denying that there are all different views and the different factions in the review conference. So to produce any strong statement is virtually impossible. And so you have to compromise, and end result will be a comprehensive document, contains many elements, but still, if you read it carefully, they are very weak, rather soft documents. So, but I think that's a kind of reality given the consensus rule of the review conference process. And you have to have sort of realistic, modest expectation out of the review conference. If you go to the conference with great expectations, there's a greater chance you end up disappointed. So important thing, not only for the last review conference, but for the next review conference, for everybody who goes to the review conference, is to go there with realistic, modest expectations. It is unfortunate to say that because I have been working hard on disarmament and non-proliferation. So for those who have a great expectation to achieve a world without nuclear weapons, one day it is not a very encouraging statement. But this means that you cannot put all your hope, expectations on the review conference as such. In a narrow sense. There will be a lot of things you have to do outside the review conference itself, outside the review conference room. And that is what some winning states, governments are doing after the review conference, and also the non-governmental organizations are doing. One of them is, for example, International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation Disarmament, easily called Gareth Evans Yoriko Kawaguchi Commission. They came up with a series of recommendations. Some of them, if you compare similar items, are listed with the review conference, the final document. But as NGO activities, as one of the outcome, they now have started European Leadership Network, which is sort of leadership network of the European leaders, political leaders, who are devoted to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. They recently had a seminar in London on extended deterrence specifically, because they know that the extended deterrence question has to be dealt with if you promote nuclear disarmament and weapons reduction. You have to face the question of deterrence one day. They have recently established a similar network for Asia Pacific. So they will be starting activities soon. These networks can generate sort of outside government momentum to continue promote the cause of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. The governments of foreign ministers of Japan, Germany, Australia, and 7 more countries have got together last September in New York and recently in Berlin to discuss ways to continue to promote the cause of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. And they came up with a series of recommendations. They came up with 4 specific recommendations. I just simply mentioned them. One is to work on technical discussions on the CTBT in an attempt to generate the momentum to start negotiations of an FMCT, Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. Second of all, they called on all states to ratify CTBT. Well, this has been mentioned many times, but it's good that they mentioned. They also said specifically to support the preparatory commission to set up effective monitoring verification system. This is important because it's been more than 10 years now, and some of the monitoring stations becoming rusty, and they need to be renewed, and so support is important. Third of all, they made a proposal on standard reporting form by nuclear weapon states to report on the progress of nuclear disarmament. I'm sure they will be discussing it in Paris soon, but they made a rather ambitious proposal on this, and I hope weapon states give a serious thought to it. Last of all, they also made a statement concerning additional protocol. They welcomed ratification by the United Arab Emirates and Mexico. So they encouraged this additional protocol implementation. And last of all, they also touched upon the importance of education in the field of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. This is a very important aspect. Looking towards the future, I think I should mention three things that are critical for the success of next review conference in 2015. I think among them, the most important will be success of international conference on the Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction. I think if it is not successful, the next review conference in 2015 may become a very stormy one, something like 2005 review conference, and we may face another crisis. But in that sense, the hope is becoming dim that they can have a substantive session next year because of the political situation in the Middle East. But that should not be the end of the story. I think there's still time before 2015, and so they should achieve at least some certain progress towards Middle East zone free. I think few people would think that the one international conference can succeed in agreeing on Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction. It may take years to do so, but at least it should set a stage for continuing negotiation on such a zone, which means laying out the basic framework of an international conference, setting the stage for continued negotiation. That may be a sort of initial accomplishment that may be required at the minimum. I would say the other important questions are starting FMCT negotiations. This seems to be very difficult in Geneva, but I think we have to do something about it. The CTBT is also another important question. I think the window of opportunity may come sometime between 2013 and 2015. Having in mind the U.S. presidential election in next year, hopefully we'll continue to have non-proliferation disarmament friendly president in Washington so that we can have that chance. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. In lieu of me asking questions, I'm going to ask Peter Crail to give his presentation, and then we'll start a round off of questions.
Okay. I find myself in the unenviable position of not only following three great presenters, but also being the last presenter before dinner. Sharon, if you'll forgive me a little bit, I'm going to diverge a bit from the outline that you'd mentioned, and in the context of the name of this plenum, Our Nuclear Future, focus on the next steps and looking forward. So I think it is safe to say that the 2010 NPT Review Conference was an important achievement. The states parties were able to overcome a lot of obstacles and agree on a modest but forward-looking plan of action on the treaty's 3 pillars. Now, while the final document could have been stronger in many areas, the states parties did leave the treaty in a better place than it was prior to the conference. To a large extent, the success of the conference was due to the positive momentum going into the meeting. In essence, the idea that success breeds success. And much of this momentum came from a reinvigorated commitment by the United States to work towards a world free of nuclear weapons, and many review conference participants had recognized this development. But also important was the willingness of states to tackle new proliferation challenges, including the issue of nuclear security. But I think the true measure of success of an NPT review conference is not just a matter of arriving at agreement on a final document. It's a matter of whether states can individually and collectively meet their commitments by reducing the number and salience of nuclear weapons and by preventing their spread. So one of the critical questions now is what can be done looking forward to 2015 that will provide similar momentum to help that conference strengthen the NPT once again. And I think there are 3 key areas. All of these have been mentioned by the presenters before: advancing progress on nuclear disarmament, improving the ability to detect and deter proliferation, and implementing the Middle East resolution. Now, on nuclear disarmament, I think that particularly there's what's called Action 5 of the 2010 Review Conference document presents both an important opportunity and an important measuring stick for progress on disarmament due to both its wide-ranging nature and its call for a progress report at the 2010 PrepCom. Now, many of the specific items called for in Action 5 still require steps by the United States and Russia to lead. I think in particular, both countries still need to lead on deeper nuclear reductions, which doesn't necessarily require a new agreement or a new treaty to do so in the near term. The continued deployment of 1,550 strategic warheads exceeds the requirements of nuclear deterrence in the post-Cold War era. Russia is already below New START warhead levels and should continue the ongoing process of retiring old strategic systems, and Washington should incentivize and reciprocate this process by furthering its own reductions, recognizing that the existing nuclear missions can still be met with numbers below New START. Now, other nuclear weapon states, of course, have an important role to play. The 5 countries should regularize the discussions held last September, and as has been mentioned, the discussions later this month, with a view to increasing transparency regarding their nuclear weapon stockpiles and reducing the role of nuclear weapons in their security policies. Now, another key measure of the progress made on disarmament heading into the 2015 conference is, of course, going to be the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. The 2010 document called on nuclear weapon states to ratify the CTBT with all expediency. The Obama administration has indicated its intent to do so, and last month, Undersecretary of State Ellen Tauscher had said that the administration has begun to make its case to the Senate. Now, it will take some time to lay the groundwork for ratification, but a sustained effort can achieve Senate agreement on that by the 2015 conference. Meanwhile, the United States is not alone. Beijing has indicated that it has begun the ratification process, and it should seek to conclude that process with the expediency mentioned in the final document. Now, just as greater progress on disarmament needs to be made before the 2015 conference, the safeguards regime also needs to be strengthened. The most important step that non-nuclear weapon states can take, as has been mentioned, is the ratification of the additional protocol and supporting the principle that the protocol should be made the safeguard standard with the view of reaching agreement on that by the 2015 conference. Now, the position held by some non-nuclear weapon states that they will not adopt or promote additional non-proliferation measures before there's further progress on disarmament, I think is a counterproductive approach that only increases reluctance on the disarmament front, and also abandons the principle that preventing proliferation is an important goal in its own right. The best way for non-nuclear weapon states to defend the rights enshrined in Article 4 is to vigorously protect against the countries that would abuse it. The IAEA has highlighted for several years the refusal of both Iran and Syria to cooperate with its investigations, and both have now been found in noncompliance with their safeguards obligations. The agencies should be given the legal tools and the political backing to uncover the extent of any illicit nuclear activities. More broadly, the understanding reached in 1995 that the peaceful uses of nuclear energy should be pursued in conformity with Articles 1, 2, as well as 3 of the treaty should be reaffirmed during the next review process. It's for the confidence built by the safeguards that countries show that they are in compliance with their Article 2 obligations. NPT parties should also reaffirm the safeguards requirement that to provide early design information regarding the construction of any additional nuclear facilities, rejecting any unilateral interpretation of that responsibility. Now, moving to the Middle East, as has already been recognized, the agreement on the conference was critical to the success of the 2010 conference, and it's, of course, I think fair to recognize that progress made the success in 2015 will very much depend on progress made on that. Now, in that light, merely holding the conference is not enough to show that progress has been made, but we should also not expect the conference to chart a path to a zone free of WMD in the region. But there's plenty of room in between. One of the most important contributions the conference can make is the initiation of some type of process or follow-on steps to discuss both definitional issues related to the elements of a zone as well as potential early confidence-building measures. For instance, all states should recognize that the ratification of the CTBT would contribute to regional security and reduce nuclear dangers. The challenges to hold a conference, of course, need to be surmounted before you can try and make progress beyond that. The attendance of all relevant countries in the region will be important, and so the atmosphere will need to be conducive to a productive discussion rather than simply an attempt to isolate Israel. I think it's important to remember that the 95 resolution creates obligations for all countries in the region to take practical steps towards a zone free of weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them, as well as refraining from actions that would preclude that objective. Unless these comprehensive responsibilities are recognized, the conference will essentially be a wasted effort. Now, to sum up, last year the NPT members reinvigorated the treaty that lies at the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime. But strengthening the regime is not simply a matter of agreements made every 5 years, but efforts to follow up on those agreements. Over the next 4 years, states will need to build on their latest success and generate momentum that will carry forward the non-proliferation disarmament agenda.
Wow, thank you. You panelists were terrific in following most instructions. Am I the only one who might be a little disappointed in progress in the NPT? I mean, we have remarkable, I think, optimism on this panel, which is commendable. But when I think about the additional protocol, and I compare it to, say, for example, the adoption of a full-scope safeguards requirement, and I count back. So the U.S. adopted full-scope safeguards in '78, and it took the NSG 13 years to adopt it. May I remind you, the additional protocol was called 93+2 for a reason, because it began in 1993. But if you give it a little extra room and say, okay, it wasn't adopted until 1998, that's still 13 years. To my mind, the additional protocol, that's a no-brainer, and the conference itself, it's good that it was mentioned, but I kind of wonder, is this just a diplomatic time scale that we're seeing here, and can we ever get beyond that? Does anybody have a comment, or is that too controversial?
Well, I'm very eager to hear Hossam's answer, but I think it's important to remember that I think Director General Amano had made a target of 100 adherence to the additional protocol by the time of the review conference. And I think we made that. I think it was actually 101, and I think now we're at 108. And I'm pretty sure that counts the EU as only one. So that means you really are over 135 out of 189 NPT parties.
That have ratified or signed?
That have, I think those are ratifications, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there are more who have signed. Sorry, I didn't double check the numbers. But anyway, it's more than you'd think. And it's hard. There are reasons that some governments have said, they will not adhere to the additional protocol unless certain developments take place. There are various reasons. Some are very small countries without nuclear programs or with very limited nuclear programs. So they, and because they're small governments, they haven't focused on this. So there are a lot of different reasons. But again, I think as with a lot of these questions, it's a question of whether the glass is half full or empty.
Okay. Asan,
Yeah, very, very briefly on this, I think the additional protocols joined by nuclear weapon states are not really adding much in terms of safeguards.
Agreed.
The model protocol for the states, for the nuclear weapon states, and that one for the non-NPT countries, actually is very much of a symbolic nature. It does not cover anything. You select willingly a facility that is not used for any military purposes whatsoever, and this is the only facility that will be subject for that. For non-nuclear weapon states, it's an extremely intrusive set of measures that would add an additional load to them, be it administrative and technical and so on. And the main issue here is, why should we take on board further safeguards commitments that are not listed in the treaty? We are not required under the NPT to have that. The NPT only speaks of what became the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement, but doesn't cover additional protocols. And why should we do that if there is a lack of progress on nuclear disarmament and absolutely no safeguards whatsoever that are credible in their magnitude and effect imposed to secure nuclear disarmament? And I think this issue came again very much on the surface in Committee 25 debate. I think it was 2005, 2006, where the Board of Governors established this committee to look at ways and means to enhance the effectiveness of the safeguards system, including the additional protocols. And discussions on nuclear disarmament were very evident, and there was absolutely no agreement on how to move forward because of that. So I think it will remain an issue here.
Any other comments? Ambassador, and then...
As to the additional protocol, indeed it would be wonderful if the review conference process can state that it is a requirement under the NPT, but the reality is they have not been able to. Under the circumstances, the next step countries may consider is making it the condition of supply in the nuclear suppliers group. And they have been trying in the group, but they have not been able to so far. But I wish they would do soon. And the fact of life on the ground is that the pressure is mounting to soften the condition. It's moving the other way because of this nuclear renaissance. That there are many potential buyers showing up around the world. And suppliers are becoming keen to sell their products, and they don't want to have any obstruction. So I think those non-professional experts have to work harder.
Agreed. Peter?
Just to follow up, but broaden a bit from the additional protocol, something that Ambassador Abe had touched on earlier. I think if you remove a lot of the hedging language in the final document, and I think you've got a really solid document. But instead, what the document did is that it recognized the interest of many states to do such and such, or recognized that many states believe that this, things like the additional protocol should be the standard. And I think that the direction that we should move in is to get rid of that hedging language. But that was also, in a way, kind of part of the, in a sense, part of the brilliance of how it was done was that it kept those principles in the document and allowed all states to agree to them where there are still serious disagreements.
So we now invite questions from the audience. No, you've solved everyone's issues. No, we have one back here. Sir.
My name is Hans-Joachim Schmidt. I'm coming from the Peace Research Institute in Frankfurt. And our institute is also involved in the preparation of the upcoming WMD Peace Conference for the EU. So my question is in particular to the American side. What is the present status of your preparation for that conference and your perspective on the conference? Thank you.
Scott, I think.
I didn't hear which conference you're referring to. Sorry.
Is this the Middle East, WMD
Okay.
free conference?
If you remember what's in the final document, it identifies 3 states, and these are the 3 who sponsored the 1995 resolution on the Middle East at the 1995 NPT Review and Extension Conference. Those 3 states, along with UN Secretary General, are called upon in the final document in 2010 to convene the conference. So that's clearly the first step that has to be taken to make this happen. And we are actively, as I said earlier, at very high levels seeking to do that. I think I'll just stop there.
All right. Do you want to?
Just very brief comment.
Sure.
I think, of course, there are a number of measures put in a deliberate order how to arrive at convening the conference. I think one first step is, of course, the appointment of a facilitator agreement on a venue to hold it in, of course, the terms of reference and the workshop of the EU and so on. So I think it is quite elaborate and I think quite consultative and important consultative work is already underway. Of course, it's been a year since we decided this, but I think there's still room for holding the conference in its time, in its planned time and in an effective way. While I have the floor, I just was compelled to make a very fast response to what Ambassador Abbey said regarding making the additional protocol a condition for supply in the NSG, and I just wondered, wouldn't it be a priority making the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement a condition for supply, which is not the case now?
Both are.
There are exceptions that allow that supply without Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. And
India, you're referring to?
Yeah, I think this is maybe one of the ways to really look at how the Nuclear Suppliers Group can again gain some of its credibility and pursue the same task for which it was established in this regard. I think the additional protocol will not address this, but rather seeing how to consolidate its use of the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement in accordance with the NPT as a condition for supply.
I don't disagree. NSG is not a perfect body.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we reverse the exception?
Not really.
India?
I think what decisions made by NSG is, I think are NSG responsibility, but it's very important to really see a way to. I think it has affected the credibility of the NSG severely, and I think it has affected its purpose. So there is a need to address this issue in whatever way that it could be.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And just one point of clarification. The NSG decided at some point to address further restrictions for enrichment and reprocessing before addressing the additional protocol as a condition of supply. And you can criticize them and say that was a mistake because now there's a small exception in the criteria that they're thinking about for enrichment and reprocessing that would not require the additional protocol. And I would say that weakens the argument that or the case they have to take up next to make the additional protocol a condition of supply. So I think the nuclear suppliers group, and I'm surprised that there was not a session actually in this conference, is really could be in deep trouble. I know they're having a meeting soon, so maybe they'll get themselves out of the hole.
And one other element, if you allow me, is that not all the members of the nuclear suppliers group are having additional protocols in force. So in order you have to practice what you preach, and if suppliers do not have it, why should importers actually?
Well, that has been the problem with them agreeing on the AP. Do we have any other questions? All right, I'm going to, here we go, in the center.
Hi, this is Naeem Ahmed from Pakistan. My question, okay, let me make first a small comment. Like Pakistan, which is one of the 3 non-signatory countries to the NPT, when it tested its nuclear weapons in 1998, it clearly said that the nuclear program of Pakistan was India specific. If these insecurities are not resolved, then Pakistan would continue to develop more nuclear weapons. So my question is there any mechanism devised in the NPT or additional protocol to address the insecurities of a country like Pakistan, which also links the signing of NPT to the India's signing of the treaty?
Briefly.
Good question.
I can very briefly. I think paragraph 2 of Article 6 of the NPT addresses exactly that, because the treaty is, at the end of the day, many of us read the very strong component of general and complete disarmament embodied in the second part of, or the second paragraph of Article 6, through which many of us within the non-aligned movement, for example, interpret as a nuclear weapons convention. So the NPT is supposed to serve the objective of complete nuclear disarmament. If we fail to arrive at its universality, the natural route would be a nuclear weapons convention where all the countries would be on board, including those that are non-NPT members. Any such effort would have to be global and all-inclusive. So I think, yes, there is this framework, and indeed it can be quite effective down the road in this particular case in South Asia. Perhaps not very much for the Middle East, which we have much more promise on putting in force a regional process, but maybe in South Asia this can be a very helpful option as well.
Peter?
I would just say I'm not sure if in terms of South Asia, the focus should be on the NPT. There are steps that both countries can take in the near term to start to move in a more positive direction in terms of nonproliferation and disarmament, including the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, including particularly for Pakistan not to further block efforts to agree on a fissile material cutoff treaty. I think those are 2 steps that well before any kind of nuclear weapons convention or ultimate nuclear disarmament by the 2 countries that they can both take. And I'd also say in terms of Pakistan addressing some of its insecurities, I think that what it's doing now in terms of currently building up a massive fissile material stockpile isn't necessarily going in the direction of addressing some of the securities that it's been facing.
Ambassador, did you want to comment? Ambassador Ame?
Yes. An academic answer to your question is that there is, I think, Security Council resolutions and statements which said, talked about positive security assurance, which said that I think permanent members would offer assistance to those countries who have been attacked by nuclear weapons. But it didn't say they would use nuclear weapons. There's also negative security assurance, which said nuclear weapon states would not use nuclear weapons against those countries under the NPT. But Pakistan, being outside the NPT, cannot benefit from that benefit. So some other countries sought extended deterrence to get assurance that the nuclear weapon states offer security assurance with the nuclear deterrence. But that positive security assurance in the Security Council framework does not go that far.
Let me explain very briefly what do I mean by insecurities of Pakistan. It's not because of the nuclear program of India, but it's because of the long-lasting issue of Kashmir as well as the historical animosity between the two countries. So Pakistan also links its nuclear program to the resolution of Kashmir issue. So is there any guarantee or is there any provision which addresses such kind of insecurities of a country like Pakistan?
Well, I would suggest Asam's first answer in terms of under Article 6, which calls not just for nuclear disarmament, but general and complete disarmament. But it's very difficult to pin your military planning on such a long-range goal. However, if you're seeking an answer to your question that says, well, the NPT doesn't do anything for me, and therefore I have a right to keep my nuclear weapons and be engaged in an arms race in South Asia, I personally would not draw that conclusion. I would also say that the NPT does not, says, I forget what the exact language is, about doesn't preclude states undertaking regional nuclear weapons free zones, and I'm sure many people would love to see a South Asian nuclear weapons free zone. Mm-hmm. If there, yeah.
One last word. I think there's a magic term in Article 6. It says to negotiate in good faith. Assuming there is good faith, you assume then that there will be progress on FMCT, progress on CTBT, across the board, because it all is aiming towards the objective of nuclear disarmament. Little steps that eventually bring us there.
You can allow two last questions. Can you be super brief? And then
yes,
Mr.
mine
Wang
is
here.
super brief. My name is Jebom Kim, working with the Korean Council on Foreign Affairs. I would like to ask all of you a kind of brief wrap-up of the long-term prospect of the review conferences. Perhaps we can mention how do you have a kind of prospect for the next session in 2015, because as a visionary, maybe you can go into the broader picture, which can combine with the President Obama's vision for the world without nuclear weapons. And he specifically envisioned some kind of interim goals setting for 2014. So maybe as you have on a piecemeal basis mentioned the outcome of successful aspects of 2010 review committee, which was drastically better than the other one in 2010. It means that we can envision even better results from 2015. Then how can you fix these two, Obama's vision and the experts review committee review conference in 2015? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you just pass the microphone to Mr. Wang here? We'll take them two together, and then each will have an opportunity to comment very briefly for final comments.
Right. Well, I'm from China. I have a specific question for Hassan, and this is with regard to the possible results of the WMD conference of the Middle East. Realistically speaking, or taking particularly the new situation he mentioned, for instance, in that neighborhood, what would be, for instance, the most likely objectives or specific objectives that could be achievable? For instance, would there be a process of a depacking? We know the issues of the WMD, they're all packaged together? Or specifically, for instance, what, for instance, could be the direct results versus, for instance, the CDBT or the CWC and so on?
Okay, so one very specific question and then a very broad question.
Yeah.
Let's go in reverse order, whatever order you were in before. So Peter first.
Just to answer the first question very briefly, you run into the question of, well, what do you mean by success? I think it's very easy for the states parties to come together and agree on a mild-mannered final document. But I don't think that helps move the process forward. It doesn't help move the agenda forward at all. And if we're looking at, well, how can the states parties be successful in advancing the agenda at the next conference? I think that really depends on the steps that are taken in the interim to do what they pledged to do last year.
Okay. Ambassador Abe?
American conservatives very often argue NPT is useless. It could not stop North Korea. It could not stop Iraq at some stage, or it may not be able to stop Iran. But I think the treaty will remain until nuclear weapons convention, to ban the weapon, comes into force.
All right, Scott.
I think part of your question was, what are the prospects for 2015? What would we expect? I think there are a number of wild cards, some of which we talked about. The Middle East is the key one. But what I would expect would be a conference where the actions that were agreed upon in 2010 were examined and updated. And hopefully, Asan mentioned the fact that we couldn't get agreement on the, you might say, the backward look, we call it, look at what happened in the prior years. Maybe we can get agreement this time. But even if we can't, the goal would be to get a revised version, an updated version that hopefully reflects some success. And then your other part of your question was the link to President Obama's vision. I think his vision is very long term. He actually said, probably not in his lifetime. So I don't think anyone expects that we will have a world free of nuclear weapons by 2015. But hopefully it'll be yet another milestone that will both reflect progress and also point toward measures for future progress.
Hossam, you have both questions.
Okay, I think my colleagues addressed the first question very well, so I wouldn't get there. And I think that there would be a degree of speculation if we try at this stage to judge the possible outcome of 2015. I think we will be very much measured against that by the actual implementation effort we succeed in. So I think if we implement what we agreed on in 2010, we are much more likely to achieve success in 2015. If not, 2015 would be would have far less prospects for success. On the second question, I think the entire effort is to launch a regional process that should bring together all countries of the Middle East that have a serious concern on establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, plus other weapons of mass destruction, to really look into the modalities, the time frame in which this should be taking place, the kind of negotiation framework that they would like to launch on this, the final objectives, the modalities of verification, the clear-cut scope of application, if there would be a role of the IAEA or not in this regard. I think all these issues would be there. What is best now is that there has been no effort to prejudge anything. The entire mandate is just to provide the forum, allow the countries to sit together, and give them hope that they could get somewhere from there. And I think from that point, it becomes the responsibility of regional states with the proper sponsorship of key parties, including the three depositories.
Well, thank you all. Thanks for your attention and your questions, and please join me in thanking our terrific panelists.
Thank you, everyone. Now, a standing buffet dinner is ready upstairs on the second floor on Orchid Room. Now, for those who are not familiar with the location, use the escalator on the way out to the main lobby. It's located on the far right corner. The farthest room on the right side is Orchid Room. And also note that there is a plenary session right after the dinner at 8:50 in this room on the topic of crisis management on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.